The American flag flutters behind me, its red, white and blue a stark contrast against the clear sky, the same colors I've sworn to protect for over 2 decades of my life. I straighten my uniform, still fitting after all these years, and run my weathered fingers over the US Army patch that has defined so much of who I am. The creases in my face tell stories that words often fail to capture. Each wrinkle, a battle fought. Each gray hair, a sacrifice made. I never thought I'd be here, sharing the most painful chapter of my life with strangers. But some stories need to be told, not for sympathy, but as testimony to what happens when duty to country collides with the fragile architecture of family life. My name is James Sullivan, 60 years old now, though some days my body feels much older. 25 years of military service will do that to you. Afghanistan, Iraq, places whose names most Americans struggle to pronounce correctly. Places where I left pieces of my soul buried alongside brothers who never made it home. The thing about war that nobody tells you, it's not just fighting that changes you. It's the waiting, the endless stretches of time where nothing happens and your mind wanders to what you're missing back home. Birthday parties, first steps, anniversary dinners, the ordinary moments that stitch together what we call a life. I missed my son Michael's high school graduation because I was pulling survivors from a bombed-out village. I missed my daughter Emily's college acceptance celebration because I was in a field hospital with shrapnel in my leg. Each absence justified by duty, honor, country. Words that rang hollow every time I saw my children's faces growing more distant in photographs sent months after they were taken. Sarah, my wife, ex-wife now, she tried to understand. For years, she maintained the home front with a resilience that matched any soldier's. But resilience has its breaking point. Hers came during my 3rd deployment. I can't blame her for finding comfort in Bob Thompson's presence. He was there. I wasn't. It's as simple and as complicated as that. When I finally returned stateside permanently, I was a stranger in my own life. The divorce papers waited alongside my honorable discharge. My children, now adults, had formed their identities in my absence. The family portrait had been redrawn, and I was now standing in the margins looking in. I settled in Fayetteville, North Carolina, close to Fort Bragg, a small apartment that echoed with emptiness. I kept it sparse, military habit, I suppose. Everything in its place, nothing unnecessary. My walls adorned only with a few photographs and service commendations that meant everything to the military, but nothing to the people I'd lost. I tried to rebuild connections, weekly phone calls that grew shorter, monthly visits that became quarterly, then annually. I sent birthday cards with money I could barely afford to part with, Christmas presents carefully selected but acknowledged with brief, polite thanks. The emotional distance grew even as I tried desperately to cross it. Bob Thompson, meanwhile, became Dad in all the ways that mattered. Coaching little league games, helping with homework, walking my daughter down the aisle at her wedding. He was a successful real estate developer, or so everyone thought, with a mansion in Charlotte's most exclusive neighborhood. Material comfort can't buy love, they say, but it certainly helps when competing for it. I took whatever scraps of family life I could get. An invitation to Thanksgiving dinner, being included in family photos, always positioned at the edge, easily cropped out if needed. I accepted this arrangement with the same stoicism that got me through firefights and long desert nights. Adapt, overcome, survive. Which brings me to that Father's Day, the day that would ultimately set in motion events none of us could have anticipated. The invitation came unexpectedly. Sarah called, rare enough to be noteworthy, saying that both kids would be at their home in Charlotte and wouldn't it be nice if I joined them. Michael has something for you, she added, almost as an afterthought. Hope, that dangerous emotion I'd learned to suppress, flickered to life. I spent 3 hours polishing my shoes and pressing my uniform before the drive. Military habits die hard, and I wanted to look my best. Perhaps this was a turning point, I thought. Perhaps time had softened the edges of our fractured history. The Thompson estate was impressive, manicured lawns and a 3-car garage housing vehicles worth more than my annual pension. I parked my 15-year-old Ford at the very end of the driveway, suddenly self-conscious of its rusted fender and fading paint. Emily greeted me with a quick hug, progress from the handshake of previous visits. Her eyes, so like her mother's, held a warmth that momentarily thawed something frozen inside me. My grandson Tyler peeked shyly from behind her legs. I'd met him only twice before, this continuation of my bloodline who barely knew me as anything but a name occasionally mentioned. The living room was a showcase of success, leather furniture, abstract art, and a television that covered nearly an entire wall. Bob sat in what was clearly his usual chair, a throne from which he presided over the domain that should have been mine. Sarah busied herself in the kitchen, her greeting a distracted wave. Michael arrived last, carrying gift bags with designer logos. My son had his mother's features, but my height and build. He'd grown into a handsome man, successful in the tech industry. We had little in common now beyond genetics. His handshake was firm, the handshake of business meetings and networking events, not of a son greeting his father. The gift-giving began almost immediately. Michael presented Bob with the latest iPhone, wrapped in premium paper. "The newest model," he proudly announced. "Figured you'd want to upgrade." Bob received it with the entitled satisfaction of someone accustomed to the finer things. The second gift followed, an envelope containing tickets for a luxury retreat in the Blue Ridge Mountains. "For you and Mom," Michael explained. "5 stars all the way. You both deserve it." The gratitude, the hugs, the photographs capturing the moment. I observed it all with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying an unfamiliar culture. This was family life, but not my family life. I was merely a spectator. Then Michael turned to me. I noticed Emily watching with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Was it pity? Embarrassment? My son extended his hand toward me, just his hand, nothing else. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," he said, the words practiced, devoid of warmth. I took his hand, feeling the coldness of his skin against mine. This was my gift, a handshake, a formal acknowledgement of biology, nothing more. No wrapped package, no card, not even the courtesy of pretending there might have been something more that was forgotten or delayed in shipping. I forced a smile that never reached my eyes. "Thank you, son," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's good to see you." The moment passed quickly, everyone eager to move beyond the awkwardness. Conversation turned to Bob's business success, Michael's recent promotion, Emily's teaching position. I contributed little, having little to contribute that anyone seemed interested in hearing. War stories have no place at a family dinner table. My silence was both self-preservation and mercy to them. As the evening progressed, I felt increasingly transparent, as if I were fading from visibility entirely. Perhaps that would have been easier, the physical presence of absence. Tyler, my grandson, watched me with curious eyes throughout dinner. Children see what adults miss. They haven't yet learned to overlook inconvenient truths or uncomfortable presences. In his gaze, I recognized something unsettling. He was trying to understand why this man in uniform, this stranger called grandfather, sat so uneasily among them. The dinner concluded, and I made my excuses early. The 2-hour drive back to Fayetteville awaited, and night driving had become more difficult with age. No one protested my departure. No one suggested I might stay overnight, though the mansion surely had guest rooms to spare. As I walked to my car, I heard small footsteps behind me. Tyler had followed me out, escaping momentarily from parental supervision. "Did you fight in a war?" he asked, his voice small but clear in the evening air. I knelt down, my knees protesting the movement. "Several," I answered. "Were you scared?" "Every day," I admitted. He considered this with the seriousness only children can bring to important questions. "Then why did you go?" The simplicity of his question deserved the dignity of a truthful answer. "Because sometimes we do difficult things to protect the people we love." He nodded, accepting this in the way children do before adults teach them to be cynical. Then, surprising me, he extended his small hand. I took it, expecting a handshake like his father's. Instead, he placed something in my palm, a crude drawing on folded paper. I opened it to find a stick figure in green, standing beside an American flag. "Happy Father's Day, Grandpa," he whispered, then ran back inside before I could respond. That crayon drawing, now framed on my wall, was worth more than any iPhone or luxury vacation. It was acknowledgement, recognition, the first thread in what might become a connection. What I didn't know then, as I drove home with that drawing carefully placed in my breast pocket, was that life was about to deal all of us an unexpected hand. The comfortable worlds we had constructed, both my modest existence and their luxurious one, were about to collide in ways none of us could have imagined. And it would begin, ironically enough, with a doctor's appointment I nearly cancelled. I almost skipped that doctor's appointment. After decades of military physicals, I'd grown weary of clinical white rooms and the practiced sympathy of medical professionals. But the persistent cough and fatigue had begun to interfere with my morning runs, one of the few military habits I still maintained in civilian life. The VA hospital in Fayetteville hadn't changed much over the years. The same faded motivational posters, the same uncomfortable plastic chairs filled with men and women whose bodies carried the invisible weight of service. We acknowledged each other with slight nods, the universal language of veterans, no words needed. We understood the shared experience that civilians, no matter how well-intentioned, never quite grasped. Dr. Mitchell had been treating veterans for 30 years. His handshake was firm, his manner direct, qualities I appreciated. "The test came back, James," he said, skipping the small talk. "Another thing I appreciated, it's not good news." The technical terms washed over me. Exposure to chemical agents during my third deployment to Iraq, progressive lung disease, cellular damage, prognosis, 6 to 8 months. I received the news with the same stoicism I'd shown when informed of ambushes or failed missions. Information to be processed, not emotionally engaged with. I asked practical questions about treatment options, pain management, what to expect. Dr. Mitchell seemed unsettled by my calm. "Is there someone I should call for you, James? Family who should know?" I thought of Michael's cold handshake, Emily's distracted smiles, Sarah's careful distance. "No," I answered, "there's no one who needs to be burdened with this." Dr. Mitchell frowned. "Everyone needs someone, soldier." And I left with a folder of information and prescriptions, walking through the hospital parking lot in a strange state of detachment. Terminal. Such a final word. Terminals are where journeys end, where passengers disembark. I was being asked to disembark from life itself. Driving home, I passed the local elementary school just as classes were letting out. Children streamed through the doors, reuniting with waiting parents. The casual embraces, the easy affection. It struck me then how long it had been since anyone had touched me with genuine warmth. Not since Sarah, not since before the war changed me. My apartment welcomed me with silence. I placed the medical folder on my kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. 6 to 8 months. What does one do with such a specific countdown? I'd always imagined I'd have time to repair what was broken with my children, time to know my grandson, time to find some purpose in civilian life that matched the clarity of purpose I'd had in uniform. Now, time had become a finite resource, rapidly depleting. I made a decision that night, sitting alone at my kitchen table. I would not tell them. What good would come of it? Obligatory visits motivated by guilt, awkward attempts at reconciliation under the shadow of impending death. No. If bridges were to be rebuilt with my family, they would be built on honest ground, or not at all. The next morning, I began putting my affairs in order. Unlike my outward appearance of modest means, my financial situation was considerably more substantial. Combat pay, hazard pay, overseas bonuses. For years, I'd had little to spend it on besides investments. While Bob Thompson showcased his wealth with mansions and luxury cars, I'd quietly built a portfolio that would have surprised many. More importantly, I had maintained a comfortable home across town from my apartment, a home few knew existed. 3 bedrooms, a spacious yard situated near a park. I'd purchased it years ago, imagining a future where my children might visit with their families, where grandchildren might play on holidays. That future never materialized, but I kept the house, using it only occasionally when the emptiness of my apartment became too pronounced. Now it would serve another purpose. I spent the next 2 weeks between doctor appointments and meeting with my attorney, updating my will, establishing trusts, ensuring that regardless of our estrangement, my family would be provided for. I arranged for my military pension to continue supporting my secret foundation for children of fallen soldiers, perhaps my only meaningful legacy. Nature, it seems, has a perverse sense of timing. 3 weeks after my diagnosis, hurricane warnings began appearing on weather reports. Charlotte, where Sarah and Bob lived, was directly in the projected path. These storms had become more severe in recent years. Climate change, the scientists said. I called Emily, suggesting they might want to evacuate inland. Dad, Bob says the house is rated for Category 5 hurricanes, she replied, her tone suggesting I was overreacting. Besides, they've changed course before. Not this time. The hurricane hit with devastating force. I watched the news footage from my living room, neighborhoods I recognized underwater, homes with their roofs torn away like open sardine cans. Charlotte's power grid failed completely. Cell service became sporadic at best. For 3 days, I tried reaching them, each unanswered call increasing my anxiety. On the 4th day, my phone rang, an unknown number. Dad? Emily's voice was barely recognizable, thick with tears. Are you there? I'm here, I answered, gripping the phone tighter. Are you safe? Michael, Tyler, we're all physically okay, she managed. But the house, it's gone, Dad. Everything's gone. The storm had reduced Bob Thompson's proudly hurricane-proof mansion to a skeletal frame and scattered debris. Insurance would eventually help, Emily explained, but there was another problem, a bigger problem. Bob's business. She hesitated. There's been an investigation. The FBI came yesterday. The story emerged in pieces over the next 2 days. Bob's real estate empire had been built on fraudulent loans, tax evasion, and investor money diverted to maintain their lavish lifestyle. The economic house of cards had been on the verge of collapse before the hurricane physically manifested its downfall. Michael's situation wasn't much better. His tech company had been involved with Bob's business ventures. While Michael himself wasn't implicated in the fraud, his financial stability had been tied to Bob's success. Everything was frozen. Accounts, assets, future prospects. We have nowhere to go, Dad, Sarah said when she finally called. Her voice, once so familiar I could distinguish her breathing from across a dark room, now sounded like a stranger's. The hotels are full of evacuees. Our friends, she didn't finish the thought. Fair weather friends disappear with the sunshine of prosperity. I have room, I said simply. In your apartment. The doubt in her voice was clear. How could a 1-bedroom apartment accommodate 4 adults and a child? I'll make it work, I replied, not elaborating further. Text me when you're an hour away. I'll have food ready. They arrived late the following evening. A caravan of 2 cars packed with whatever possessions they'd managed to salvage. I watched from my window as they parked, their faces visible in the streetlight, exhausted, defeated. Bob's normally confident posture now stooped with the weight of public humiliation. Michael, always so composed, looked like he hadn't slept in days. Sarah's face was unreadable, a skill she'd perfected during our marriage when deployment orders arrived. I met them at the curb, helping unload bags in silence. The questions in their eyes remained unasked as I led them not into my apartment building, but down the street and around the corner to the house I'd kept secret all these years. I don't understand, Sarah was the first to speak as I unlocked the front door. You live here, but you always said, I never actually said I lived in an apartment. I corrected gently. You all assumed, and I never corrected the assumption. The house was ready for them. Beds made, refrigerator stocked, towels laid out. I'd spent the day preparing, ignoring the increasing pain in my chest, the shortness of breath that was becoming my constant companion. "Why?" Michael asked, the single word carrying years of misconceptions. "Does it matter now?" I responded. "You need a place to stay. I have room. The rest can wait until morning." That night I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my house occupied by others. Footsteps in hallways, water running in pipes, muffled conversations. The ordinary symphony of family life that had been absent for so long. Morning brought cautious exploration. I found Emily in my study, examining the wall of bookshelves. History volumes, military strategy, philosophy. Evidence of an intellectual life they'd never associated with me. "I always thought," she began, then stopped herself, "that I was just a simple soldier." I finished for her. "We're all more complex than the roles we play, Emily." Over breakfast, the first meal I'd shared with my complete family in over 15 years, the questions finally came. Why had I maintained this house secretly? Why live in apparent poverty when I clearly had means? Why the deception? Not deception, I corrected. Privacy. After the divorce, after you all established your new life with Bob, what would have been the point? Would it have changed anything if you'd known I lived in a house instead of an apartment? Their silence was answer enough. Days passed. The awkwardness of our forced cohabitation gradually eased into routines. I gave them space, often retreating to my small workshop in the garage where I restored military memorabilia, another hobby they'd never known about. My declining health was increasingly difficult to conceal, but I attributed my coughing fits and fatigue to age and allergies. It was Emily who discovered the first piece of the puzzle. Cleaning the guest room that had become hers, she accidentally knocked over a heavy bookend, revealing a wall safe I'd forgotten was visible from that angle. "Dad," she called, her voice echoing through the house. "What is this?" I found her staring at the safe, curiosity warring with respect for privacy on her face. "It's exactly what it looks like," I answered. "What's in it?" I considered lying, considered deflection. Instead, I entered the combination and opened it for her. Inside were documents I'd never shown anyone. Classified operation reports, now declassified but still sensitive. Photographs of teams whose missions would never appear in history books. Medals awarded in private ceremonies because the operations were too sensitive for public acknowledgement. Emily's hands trembled as she held a photograph of me with 11 other men somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan. Only 3 of us had returned from that mission. "This is why you were gone so long," she whispered. "This is why you couldn't tell us where you were or what you were doing." "Some of it," I acknowledged. The documents made their way around the family over the next few days. My history revealed in fragments, operations that had saved thousands of civilian lives, prevented terrorist attacks, secured vital intelligence. The long absences that Sarah had resented, that my children had felt abandoned by, recontextualized as necessary sacrifices for a greater good. Michael was less impressed by my military revelations than by what he found while helping me organize some paperwork in the kitchen. A bank statement from a foundation I'd established 15 years earlier, the Fallen Comrades Children's Fund. "You started this?" he asked, scanning the document that showed modest but regular transfers from my accounts. "After we lost Johnson in Fallujah," I explained. "His son was only 2 months old. I couldn't stop thinking about that boy growing up without his father. How many families has this helped? 317 at last count." Michael was silent for a long time. "And no one knows you're behind it? What would be the point of recognition?" I asked. "The help matters, not who provides it." The most damning discovery came from the most unlikely source. Tyler, exploring the attic with the boundless curiosity of childhood, found a box of old correspondence. Letters from Bob to his attorney, dating back years. Letters that referenced a DUI arrest I'd never mentioned, and bail paid by an anonymous source. "Did you know about this?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with suppressed emotion as she held the evidence of Bob's deception. "Yes." "You paid his bail?" "Yes." "Why didn't you ever use this against him? Against us?" I had no simple answer for her. How to explain that weaponizing someone's mistakes for personal advantage felt contrary to everything I believed about honor. How to explain that, despite everything, I wanted them to be happy, even if that happiness excluded me. It wasn't relevant, I finally said. The revelations continued, each day bringing new discoveries about the man I truly was versus the man they had believed me to be. The foundation, the investments, the classified operations, the private acts of charity I'd performed over the years. What I couldn't hide forever was my deteriorating health. The medications could only mask so much. The coughing fits became more frequent, harder to dismiss as temporary ailments. It was Tyler who forced the issue, finding me doubled over in pain in the hallway one evening. "Grandpa," his small voice pierced through the fog of discomfort. "Should I get Mom?" I straightened with effort, trying to smile reassuringly. "No need to worry them, buddy. Just old soldier problems." But his young eyes saw what adult eyes had chosen to overlook. "You're sick," he stated with childlike directness. "Really sick." That night, I finally told them. The diagnosis, the prognosis, the decision to keep it private. 6 to 8 months, Sarah repeated, her face pale with shock. "And you weren't going to tell us?" "What would it have changed?" I asked. "Would it have made the Father's Day handshake any warmer? Would it have brought any of you to visit more often?" My words weren't meant to wound, merely to state facts as I understood them. But I saw the impact they had, the painful recognition of truths too long ignored. The days that followed brought a strange new dimension to our forced cohabitation. Knowing my time was limited changed something fundamental in our interactions. Conversations became more meaningful, more urgent. Stories emerged that had never been shared. My experiences in war zones, their lives during my absences, and somewhere in these exchanges, something remarkable began to happen. The fractured pieces of our family, long separated by distance both physical and emotional, began a tentative reassembly. I couldn't have known then that the greatest revelations were still to come, that the foundation I'd built in secret would soon become public knowledge through an unexpected chain of events. That my quiet sacrifices would stand in stark contrast to Bob's fraudulent empire, that the simple soldier they had dismissed would be revealed as something far more complex and consequential. Nor could I have known that the doctors had made a mistake, a misreading of test results, a diagnosis that would prove catastrophically incorrect, that the 6 to 8 months I believed I had left was based on medical error. But time, whether long or short, is ultimately measured not in days, but in significance. And in those days of revelations and reconciliations, I lived more fully than I had in the decades prior. The revelation of my illness created a strange atmosphere in the house, a mixture of guilt, urgency, and awkward attempts at connection. I noticed how Sarah would linger in rooms where I was present, how Michael would offer to help with tasks I'd always handled alone, how Emily would ask questions about my military service she'd never thought to ask before. Their sudden attentiveness felt both comforting and suspicious. Was it genuine concern, or merely the obligation one feels toward the dying? Tyler, however, approached my illness with the straightforward curiosity only children possess. One morning, he climbed onto the porch swing beside me as I watched the sunrise. Another military habit I couldn't break. "Does it hurt?" he asked, swinging his legs that didn't quite reach the porch floor. "Sometimes," I answered honestly. "Are you scared?" The question caught me off guard. Fear wasn't an emotion soldiers readily admitted to. "Not of dying," I said after considering his question. "I've seen enough death to know it's just part of the journey." "What are you scared of then?" I looked at this boy, my grandson biologically, yet practically a stranger. "I'm scared I won't be remembered," I admitted. "Or worse, that I'll be remembered incorrectly." He nodded with surprising gravity. "I'll remember you right," he promised. That conversation with Tyler marked a turning point. Perhaps it was his innocent promise, or perhaps it was simply the acknowledgement of my deepest fear. But something shifted within me. I'd spent decades compartmentalizing my life, keeping my military identity separate from my family identity, my public persona separate from my private reality. Now, facing what I believed were my final months, those divisions seemed pointless. The next morning, I called Colonel Frank Wilson, my former commanding officer, and one of the few people who knew me completely. Frank had retired to a small farm about an hour away, where he ran a support group for veterans struggling with reintegration. "I need a favor, Frank," I said after exchanging brief pleasantries. "Name it," he replied without hesitation, the response of a man who'd fought beside me in the world's most dangerous places. "I need you to help me tell my story, all of it, even the classified parts that have been declassified." Frank was silent for a moment. "You never wanted recognition before. What's changed?" I explained my diagnosis, my family situation, my newfound desire to be understood before I was gone. "Are you sure about this, James? Some stones are better left unturned." "I'm sure." 2 days later, Frank arrived at my house with a box of documents and a determined expression. Sarah answered the door, regarding the imposing figure of my former commander with curiosity. "Ma'am," Frank greeted her with military formality. "Colonel Frank Wilson. I served with your husband in 3 combat theaters." "Ex-husband?" Sarah corrected automatically, then looked embarrassed. Frank's expression didn't change. "With respect, ma'am, there's no X in the Brotherhood of Arms. James is still my brother, regardless of paperwork." I introduced Frank to the rest of the family, watching their reactions as he addressed me with the respect accorded to someone of significant rank and accomplishment. They'd never seen me through the eyes of my military colleagues, never witnessed the deference with which I was treated in that world. We gathered in the living room, where Frank opened the box he'd brought. "What I'm about to share has been officially declassified," he began, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of a mission briefing. "But until recently, these operations were among the most sensitive conducted by our special forces." For the next 3 hours, Frank methodically laid out the reality of my military career. Not the sanitized version my family had been told, but the full truth, the high-risk extractions of hostages from terrorist compounds, the covert intelligence gathering deep behind enemy lines, the operations that prevented attacks on civilian targets. The reason James couldn't tell you where he was or what he was doing wasn't because he didn't care, Frank explained, looking directly at Sarah. It was because knowledge of his whereabouts could have endangered not only his life, but yours as well. Michael leaned forward, examining a photograph of me receiving a medal in a private ceremony. "Why wasn't any of this public?" "Because the nature of the operations required absolute secrecy," Frank replied. "The enemy couldn't know their security had been compromised, their plans discovered. So all those times..." Sarah's voice trailed off. "All those times I couldn't call, couldn't write, couldn't tell you when I'd be home. It wasn't choice, it was necessity," I finished for her. Emily picked up a mission report, her eyes widening as she read. "This says you personally evacuated 16 children from a village before an airstrike." Frank nodded. "Your father diverted from the mission parameters, risking court-martial to save those kids. The official report credits team effort, but every man on that operation knows it was James who made the call." As Frank continued to lay out the evidence of my actual military career, I watched their faces, shock giving way to confusion, then to something that looked almost like awe. This was not the narrative they had constructed about my absences, about my priorities, about my character. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Michael finally asked. "Would it have mattered?" I countered. "Or would it have made the deployments any easier? Would it have made my absences any less painful?" "We might have understood better," Emily said quietly. "Understanding doesn't ease loneliness," Sarah murmured, almost to herself. After Frank left, a heavy silence fell over the house. They had been confronted with a version of me that contradicted years of assumptions. The simple, emotionally distant soldier they had dismissed had been revealed as something far more complex, a decorated operative whose silence had been imposed by duty rather than indifference. That night, I heard soft knocking on my bedroom door. Sarah stood in the hallway, looking uncertain, an expression I rarely saw on her face. "May I come in?" she asked. I gestured to the armchair near the window. She sat, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her pants. "I've been thinking about what your colonel said," she began, "about the reasons for your absences." "Frank tends to romanticize things," I said. "I made choices, Sarah. I chose to accept those deployments." "Did you?" Her gaze was steady. "Or was it that you couldn't choose differently? Not because of orders, but because of who you are?" I considered her question. "There's truth in that. I always thought you chose the military over us," she continued. "That was easier to resent than accepting that you were simply responding to your nature. My nature, to protect, to serve, to put others before yourself." She looked around the modest bedroom. "Even now, this house, your finances, that foundation for fallen soldiers' children, you've continued to live by that code." "It's the only way I know how to live," I admitted. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I couldn't understand it back then. Maybe I still don't fully. But I see now that I judged you for being exactly who you always were." "And who was that?" "A man who couldn't turn away from what he saw as his duty, even when it cost him everything he loved." Her words hung in the air between us. Not quite forgiveness, not quite reconciliation, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The next morning brought another unexpected visitor. Jake Miller, my neighbor from the apartment building and fellow veteran, arrived with news that would change everything. "Have you seen this?" he asked, handing me a printout of an online article. The headline read, "Anonymous Hero, the secret soldier who's helped hundreds of military families." My foundation had been exposed. Someone had connected the dots, tracing the funding back to me. The article detailed how a retired army operative had quietly channeled millions into supporting children who had lost parents in combat. "How did they find out?" I asked, scanning the article with growing concern. "Tyler," Michael said from behind me, his voice tight with an emotion I couldn't identify. "He found your foundation documents and asked me about them." I explained what they meant, and he apparently told his teacher for a school project about hometown heroes. "The teacher must have told someone in the media," Jake concluded. Within hours, my phone began ringing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Reporters, veterans organizations, military families who had benefited from the foundation without knowing their benefactor's identity. I declined all interviews, all recognition. That had never been the point. But the story took on a life of its own. In the age of social media, it spread rapidly. The contrast between my quiet philanthropy and Bob's fraudulent empire creating a narrative too compelling to ignore. Local news vans parked on the street. Former recipients of foundation grants began leaving thank you notes on my porch. "You need to talk to them," Emily urged, as we watched another news van arrive from the living room window. "Your story deserves to be told." "My story was never meant to be public," I insisted. "Maybe that's exactly why it should be," Michael countered, surprising me with his support. "In a world where everyone broadcasts their smallest good deeds for recognition, you've done something truly significant in complete anonymity." The pressure continued to mount until Colonel Wilson called with a request I couldn't refuse. The commanding general of Fort Bragg wanted to hold a public ceremony acknowledging my service and my foundation's work. Several high-ranking officials would attend. So would families who had benefited from the foundation. "You don't have to speak," Frank assured me. "Just show up, accept the acknowledgement, and let others do the talking." I agreed reluctantly, feeling increasingly unwell but unwilling to disappoint the families who would be attending. The ceremony was scheduled for the following week at the Veterans Memorial Park in Fayetteville. As the day approached, my symptoms worsened. The coughing fits became more violent, the fatigue more debilitating. I began to wonder if I would live long enough to attend. Sarah noticed my decline. "You need to see another doctor," she insisted, after finding me breathless after climbing the stairs. "The diagnosis is clear," I reminded her. "Another doctor won't change that." "Humor me," she said, her tone brooking no argument. The same tone she'd used when our children were small and refusing medicine. "For Tyler's sake, if not your own." To appease her, I agreed to see Dr. Diane Wilson, Frank's wife and a respected physician in her own right. She examined me thoroughly, her experienced hands gentle but thorough. "I want to run some additional tests," she said, frowning at my medical records from the VA. "Something doesn't add up here." The VA doctors were quite clear. "The VA system is overwhelmed and understaffed," she interrupted. "And these test results are inconsistent with your symptoms." I submitted to blood draws, imaging, and pulmonary function tests, more medical attention than I'd sought in years. The results wouldn't be available until after the ceremony, but I found Sarah's concern touching, even if ultimately futile. The day of the ceremony dawned clear and cool. I put on my dress uniform, now fitting loosely on my thinning frame. Every medal, every ribbon told a story, some public, some known only to those who had been there. I stood before the mirror, wondering if this would be one of the last times I wore this uniform that had defined so much of my life. Sarah helped me straighten my tie, an intimacy we hadn't shared in years. "You look distinguished," she said softly. "Distinguished is just a polite word for old," I replied, attempting humor. "No," she corrected, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "Distinguished is the right word for exactly what you are." We drove to the park together, the entire family in one vehicle for the first time in decades. Tyler sat beside me in the back seat, occasionally glancing at my medals with undisguised fascination. The park had been transformed. Rows of chairs faced a small stage, draped with American flags. A podium stood at center stage, flanked by uniformed officers. Behind them, a large screen displayed the logo of my foundation, a simple design featuring a soldier's helmet and a child's hand. As we approached, I was stunned by the turnout. Hundreds of people filled the chairs and stood in the surrounding areas, military families, veterans, community members, all there because of a foundation I had created in private, never seeking or expecting recognition. Colonel Wilson met us at the edge of the crowd. "Quite a turnout," he observed. "You've touched more lives than you realize, James." "This isn't necessary," I murmured, increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. "Yes, it is," he countered firmly. "These people need to thank you. Let them have that." We were escorted to reserved seats in the front row. As I walked down the aisle, people stood, applauding. Some saluted, others simply nodded with respect. I felt Michael stiffen beside me, perhaps seeing for the first time how others viewed his father. The ceremony began with remarks from the commanding general, praise for my service record, for my continued commitment to military families through the foundation. I listened with a strange sense of detachment, as if he were describing someone else. Then family members began to speak, spouses, children, and even grandchildren of fallen soldiers who had received support from my foundation. Their stories were heartfelt, specific, detailing how the educational scholarships, housing assistance, and counseling services had changed their lives. "My dad died when I was 4, one young woman said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "The foundation paid for my entire college education. Today, I'm a pediatric nurse. I'll spend my life saving children because someone believed in me when I had nothing." Each testimony struck me profoundly. These were real lives, real outcomes, real differences made because of resources I had quietly channeled. I had never met any of these people, never sought their gratitude, never expected to see the fruits of these investments. As the testimonials continued, I felt a strange sensation, a tightness in my chest, different from the pain of my illness. It took me a moment to recognize it as pride, not vanity or self-congratulation, but the clean, clear pride of knowing one's life had mattered. I glanced at my family. Sarah wiped tears discreetly. Emily watched the speakers with rapt attention. Michael's expression was complex, pride mingled with what looked like regret. And Tyler beamed, occasionally pointing to the stage and whispering, "That's because of my grandpa." When Colonel Wilson invited me to the podium, I rose on unsteady legs. The walk to the stage seemed impossibly long. Halfway there, the dizziness hit. A wave of disorientation so powerful, I stumbled. Frank was at my side instantly, supporting my weight. "You okay, soldier?" he murmured. "Just need a minute," I gasped, but the words triggered a coughing fit so violent I couldn't catch my breath. The last thing I remember was Sarah's face appearing before me, her expression shifting from concern to alarm as darkness closed in around me. I woke in a hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of monitors replacing the applause of the ceremony. Sarah sat beside the bed, her hand resting lightly on mine. "Welcome back," she said when she noticed my open eyes. "The ceremony," I began, "is the least of your concerns right now," she interrupted gently. Dr. Diane Wilson entered, carrying a tablet with what I assumed were my test results. Her expression was unreadable, the professional mask of a physician delivering difficult news. "James," she began, pulling up a chair, "we need to talk about your diagnosis." Diane's expression softened as she looked at the tablet in her hands. The clinical white light of the hospital room cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the concern in her eyes. "The VA diagnosis was incorrect," she said, her tone measured but tinged with controlled anger. "You don't have terminal lung disease from chemical exposure." I struggled to process her words, the fog of medication making it difficult to think clearly. "I don't understand. You have a severe bacterial pneumonia, complicated by an underlying condition that should have been caught years ago during your routine physicals." She scrolled through charts on her tablet. "It's serious, yes. You'll need aggressive treatment and recovery time. But it's not terminal, James." Sarah's hand tightened around mine. "You're saying he's not dying?" "Not from this, no." Diane's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Though I'll be filing a formal complaint about the misdiagnosis. This should never have happened." The revelation hit me with physical force, a sudden lightness in my chest that had nothing to do with my medical condition. Not dying. The countdown clock I'd been living with for weeks suddenly stopped, reset, disappeared entirely. "How long have I been here?" I asked, noticing for the first time the darkness outside the window. 3 days, Sarah answered. "They've had you sedated while they started treatment." 3 days. 3 days of my family thinking I was on death's doorstep. 3 days of whatever emotions that belief had triggered in them. "The others?" I asked, taking turns in the waiting room. Hospital policy, only one visitor at a time in ICU. Sarah's thumb traced small circles on the back of my hand, a gesture so familiar from our early years together that it created an ache of recognition. "They've been worried sick. We all have. Doctor." Wilson reviewed my treatment plan. IV antibiotics, respiratory therapy, a careful monitoring of the underlying condition. Weeks of recovery ahead, but recovery nonetheless. Not the death sentence I'd been prepared for. "I'll leave you two to process this," Diane said, standing. "Frank's outside, wearing a trench in the waiting room floor. I should update him before he gets court-martialed for threatening the nursing staff." After she left, Sarah and I sat in silence, the beeping monitors the only sound in the room. "Not dying," she finally said, as if testing the truth of the words. "Apparently not. How do you feel about that?" The question struck me as oddly profound. How did I feel about not dying, about having a future I hadn't planned for, about facing my family without the shield of impending death between us? Unprepared, I admitted. I'd made my peace with the end. Now I need to make peace with continuing. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The ceremony, before you collapsed, it was extraordinary, James. Those people, those lives you changed. I never expected to see any of that," I said. "The foundation was always meant to work silently." "Like you did," she observed. "Always working silently, behind the scenes, never seeking recognition." Another silence fell between us, more comfortable than the last. "I should let the others know you're awake," Sarah said eventually. "They've been taking shifts, so someone would always be here when you came around." The idea that my family had been maintaining a vigil, that they cared enough to ensure I wouldn't wake alone, created a warmth I hadn't felt in years. The next few days passed in a blur of medical procedures, brief visits, and long periods of exhausted sleep. Each time I woke, someone was there, Sarah reading a novel in the corner chair, Emily grading papers, Michael working on his laptop, Tyler drawing elaborate battle scenes that he insisted on explaining in detail. "The good guys are winning," he assured me, pointing to a stick figure with a cape that apparently represented me. Colonel Wilson visited daily, bringing updates from the outside world. The ceremony had continued after my collapse, transforming into something of a rally for improved veteran healthcare. Media coverage had expanded, bringing national attention to both my foundation and the systematic issues in VA medical care. "You're becoming something of a symbol," Frank informed me, seeming both amused and proud. "The silent warrior who served twice, once in combat, once through philanthropy." "I never wanted to be a symbol," I protested weakly. "None of the good ones ever do," he replied. A week into my hospitalization, Michael asked to speak with me alone. He'd been the most reserved of my visitors, his manner polite but guarded. I'd noticed how he would check his phone frequently, how his attention seemed divided between my recovery and some unseen concern. When the others left for the cafeteria, he took the chair beside my bed, his posture stiff, his expression troubled. "The company is finished," he said without preamble. "Everything's been frozen pending the investigation into Bob's finances. I'm not accused of anything illegal, but—" He shrugged, the gesture conveying the totality of his professional collapse. "I'm sorry," I offered, unsure what else to say. "My entire career, my identity, was built around that success," he continued. "The house, the cars, the lifestyle, it was all interconnected with Bob's business empire. All smoke and mirrors, apparently." He laughed bitterly. "I gave him an iPhone and a vacation package I couldn't actually afford, while you were silently funding a multi-million-dollar foundation. The money never mattered to me," I said. "It was just a resource to be directed where needed." "That's what I'm trying to understand." Michael leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You had all this wealth, all these accomplishments, and you never used them to what? Impress you? Compete with Bob? Buy your affection?" He flinched slightly at the directness of my questions. "That wouldn't have been authentic," I explained more gently. "If you reconnected with me because of what I could give you materially, what would that connection be worth? But the foundation, you gave millions to strangers, not strangers, family members of fallen comrades, people I had a duty to support. Did you feel you had no duty to us?" The question contained years of accumulated hurt. I considered my answer carefully. "My duty to you was to be your father, not your bankroll, to teach you values that would sustain you through life's hardest moments. If I failed in that duty, money wouldn't have fixed it." Michael was quiet for a long time. "I judged you," he finally said, "for your simple apartment, your old car, your seemingly ordinary life. I pitied you while admiring Bob's success." "We judge based on the information we have," I replied. "You didn't have the full picture." "Neither did you," he countered. "You didn't see how Bob manipulated us, how he subtly positioned himself as the successful provider while painting you as the absent failure, how he intercepted your letters sometimes, your calls." This revelation stunned me. "He what?" Michael nodded grimly. "Emily found a box in the attic when we were gathering what we could before the hurricane hit. Letters you'd written that we never received. Records of calls to our house that were never passed along. The betrayal cut deep. Not just Bob's interference, but the realization that many of my attempts to maintain connection had been deliberately sabotaged." "Why would he do that?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "Insecurity," Michael suggested. "He knew he could never match what you were, your integrity, your service. So he competed the only way he could, materially. And when that wasn't enough, he made sure we couldn't see the real you." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The growing distance I'd felt from my children over the years, the increasing coldness of our interactions. Not just the natural consequence of divorce and absence, but an actively cultivated separation. "The Father's Day handshake," I murmured, remembering. Michael looked away, shame evident in his expression. "Bob suggested it. Said you'd prefer something military and formal, rather than an emotional display. I believed him because it fit the image of you he'd helped create. The emotionally distant soldier, uncomfortable with affection. The calculated cruelty of it, using my military identity against me, twisting it into something cold and unfeeling, left me momentarily speechless. "I'm sorry," Michael said into the silence, "for believing him, for not seeing through it, for the handshake." "You were manipulated," I said, finding it surprisingly easy to forgive. "We all were in different ways." "What do we do now?" he asked, sounding younger than his 35 years. "Everything's collapsed. Bob's empire, my career, our financial stability. We rebuild," I answered simply. "Not what was, but something better, something authentic." Michael left shortly after, his expression thoughtful. Our conversation had shifted something between us, not an immediate repair of years of estrangement, but perhaps the foundation for something new. The following day brought another visitor, one I hadn't expected. Bob Thompson stood awkwardly in the doorway of my hospital room, looking significantly diminished from the confident, successful man who had accepted an iPhone and vacation package on Father's Day. His designer clothes had been replaced by off-the-rack basics, his manicured appearance now slightly disheveled. "May I come in?" he asked, his customary assertiveness absent. I nodded, curious about what could have brought him here. He took the visitor's chair, his discomfort evident in every movement. "I suppose you've heard about my situation." "Some of it," I acknowledged. "Everything's gone," he said flatly. "The business, the house, the investments. The FBI has frozen every account. I'll likely face charges." I waited, saying nothing. This wasn't news to me. "Sarah doesn't know I'm here," he continued. "None of them do. They'd probably try to stop me if they knew." "Why are you here, Bob?" He met my eyes directly for perhaps the first time in our long, complicated association, to apologize and to ask why you never exposed me. "Exposed you?" "The DUI, the bail you paid anonymously. You knew I was driving drunk, that I could have killed someone. You knew I hid it from Sarah, from everyone. You could have used that against me at any point." "To what end?" I asked. "To hurt Sarah, to damage her image of the man she'd chosen, to create conflict for my children. What would that have accomplished besides more pain?" Bob looked genuinely perplexed. "To get back at me, to win. I wasn't aware we were in a competition." "Of course we were," he insisted. "For their respect, their affection, their loyalty. Those aren't prizes to be won, Bob. They're gifts to be earned through consistent presence, through integrity, through putting others' needs before your own." He laughed bitterly. "And now look where we are. You're the hero with your secret foundation and your classified missions. I'm the villain with my fraudulent business and hidden debts. Life isn't that simple," I replied. "I'm no hero. You're no villain. We're just men who made different choices." "Your choices seem to have aged better than mine," he observed. "Maybe because they weren't made with an eye toward appearances or immediate gratification." Bob shifted uncomfortably. "I need to ask you something else, something important." "Go ahead." "The letters, the phone calls I intercepted." He hesitated, seemingly struggling to form the question. "Did you ever tell them about the time you came back early from deployment, when you found Sarah and me together before the divorce?" The question transported me instantly to that moment. Returning 2 weeks early from Afghanistan, hoping to surprise Sarah for our anniversary, only to discover her affair with Bob was already well underway. The confrontation that followed, the painful conversations, the decision to divorce without drama or recrimination, putting the children's well-being first. "No," I answered. "That was between the three of us." "Why not?" "It would have changed how they saw both of us. It would have forced them to take sides in an adult situation that wasn't their responsibility to judge. What good would that have done?" Bob shook his head slowly. "I've never understood you, Sullivan. Never understood how someone could consistently choose the harder path when easier options were available. The easier path isn't always the right one." He stood, seemingly having heard what he came for. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. for the manipulation, the interference, for taking advantage of your absences to paint you in a certain light. I accept your apology, I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came. What will you do now? Face the music, he replied with a grimace. Cooperate with the investigation. Try to minimize the damage. After that, he shrugged. Start over, I suppose. At 55. As he turned to leave, I called after him. Bob? He paused in the doorway. We're not in competition anymore, I said. Maybe we never needed to be. After he left, I lay back against the pillows, processing the conversation. The knowledge that Bob had actively sabotaged my relationship with my children should have angered me, but instead, I felt an odd sense of relief. The mystery of our growing estrangement now had an explanation beyond my own failings as a father. Later that afternoon, Dr. Wilson delivered good news. My response to treatment was exceeding expectations. I would be discharged within days, though with strict instructions for follow-up care and a lengthy recovery period ahead. You're lucky, she told me bluntly. If you hadn't collapsed at that ceremony, if we hadn't caught this in time... I know, I acknowledged. Thank you for the second chance. Diane's expression softened. Use it well, James. Not everyone gets one. As my discharge date approached, an unexpected issue arose. Where would I recover? My house was currently occupied by Sarah, Emily, Michael, and Tyler. My apartment was too small for the equipment and care I would initially need. Sarah resolved the dilemma with characteristic decisiveness. You'll come home, she declared during a visit, to the house. We'll convert the downstairs study into a recovery room. I can't impose. It's your house, she interrupted. If anyone's imposing, it's us. And so arrangements were made, equipment delivered, schedules coordinated for my care. A new chapter beginning that none of us had anticipated, the family reunited under one roof, not through choice but through circumstance, yet perhaps with the possibility of healing long-fractured bonds. The day before my discharge, Tyler visited alone, clutching a folded paper. I made this for your new room, he announced, carefully unfolding a drawing. It depicted 5 stick figures holding hands in front of a house. 3 tall, 1 medium, 1 small. That's us, he explained unnecessarily. A family. I studied the simple drawing, touched by the sentiment it represented. It's perfect, I told him. I'll hang it where I can see it every day. He beamed, then grew serious. Grandpa, are you still scared people will remember you wrong? The innocent question caught me off guard. Less so now, I admitted. Why do you ask? Because lots of people know about you now. The foundation and your secret missions and everything, so they'll remember you right. Out of the mouths of babes, as the saying goes. In seeking to prepare for death, I had inadvertently created a legacy that would outlive me. Not through deliberate monument building, but through quiet, consistent action aligned with my deepest values. You're very wise for someone so young, I told him. He grinned. Mum says I'm an old soul. As he chatted about his plans for once, I came home. Books he wanted to read with me, games he wanted to play. I found myself contemplating the strange turns life takes. How a Father's Day handshake, painful in its formal emptiness, had set in motion a sequence of events that led here, to genuine connection with the grandson I barely knew, to revelations that clarified years of misunderstanding, to a future I hadn't dared hope for. The next day, as the discharge paperwork was processed, I stood at the hospital window looking out at the clear blue sky, at the American flag flying in the distance over the Veterans Memorial. The same flag that had draped the coffins of comrades, that adorned my uniform, that symbolized the country I had served through war and peace. Not dying, I reminded myself, living, with all the complexity, pain, and possibility that entailed. Ready to go home? Sarah asked from the doorway. Home. Not the apartment where I'd lived in solitary simplicity, not the house I'd maintained as an empty testament to what might have been, but a new conception of home. People rather than place, connection rather than walls and roof. Yes, I answered, turning toward her and whatever future awaited. I'm ready. The journey from hospital to home was surprisingly emotional. As we drove through familiar streets, I noticed details I'd overlooked for years. The changing colors of shop awnings, new construction rising where vacant lots had been, the way sunlight filtered through trees that had grown taller in my inattention. Perhaps facing what I thought was death had awakened me to the texture of life. Sarah drove carefully, slowing over bumps to avoid jostling me. From the back seat, Tyler provided running commentary on everything we passed. "That's where we get ice cream," he informed me, "and that's my school. And that's where Mum says the best coffee is, but Dad, I mean Michael, says it's overpriced." His casual correction about Michael struck me. The complexities of modern family structures seen through a child's eyes. When we turned onto my street, I was startled to see several cars parked near the house. "What's this?" Sarah smiled slightly. "A small welcome home gathering. Nothing overwhelming. Just people who wanted to see you settled in." I hadn't expected this, hadn't considered that my return might warrant celebration. The concept of being welcomed, celebrated, desired, it felt foreign after so many years of solitary existence. As we pulled into the driveway, the front door opened. Emily emerged first, followed by Michael, then Colonel Wilson and his wife. Behind them, I recognized Jake from my apartment building and several other veterans I'd known over the years. "I thought you said small," I murmured to Sarah. "It grew organically," she replied. "People heard you were coming home and wanted to be here." The next hour passed in a blur of handshakes, gentle hugs, and sincere expressions of relief at my recovery. The study had indeed been transformed into a comfortable recovery room, complete with a hospital bed, necessary medical equipment, and, I noticed with surprise, several of my favorite books and photographs from the apartment. "Emily and I retrieved some things we thought would make it feel more like your space," Sarah explained when she caught me looking. "I hope that's all right." "It's thoughtful," I managed, touched by the consideration. As the visitors gradually departed, leaving only family, I found myself alone with Sarah in the converted study. She adjusted pillows with the efficiency of someone who had once been accustomed to caring for me. "This feels strange," I admitted. "Being back here. Being cared for. Strange for me too," she acknowledged, "but not in a bad way." We were interrupted by Michael appearing in the doorway, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "Dad, do you feel up to talking for a few minutes? There's something I'd like to discuss." Sarah excused herself, leaving us alone. Michael took the chair beside the bed, his posture reflecting the corporate executive he'd been until recently. Back straight, shoulders squared. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," he began, "about what happens next for all of us." "And," I prompted when he hesitated, "your foundation, the Fallen Comrades Children's Fund, it needs leadership now that it's public. Colonel Wilson has been handling the immediate media inquiries, but decisions need to be made about its future direction." I hadn't considered this aspect of my recovery. The foundation had operated silently for so long, needing minimal oversight once the financial structures were established. "Frank has experience with non-profits," I suggested. "Perhaps he could—" "I'd like to do it," Michael interrupted. "If you'll trust me with it." The request caught me completely off guard. But your background is corporate tech. Skills that could benefit the foundation, he pointed out, especially now that it's receiving attention and likely additional donations. It needs someone who understands organizational growth, digital infrastructure, strategic planning. He was right about the practical aspects, but something deeper seemed to be driving his request. "Why, Michael?" "Truthfully." He looked down at his hands that reminded me of my own at his age, though unmarked by the scars of combat and hard labor. "I've spent 15 years chasing success as defined by Bob. Wealth, status, material acquisition. Look where that led." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the collapse of their former life. "Your definition of success was different, quieter, more meaningful. I'd like to understand it better by living it." His honesty disarmed me. "It would mean significant lifestyle changes," I cautioned. "Non-profit work isn't lucrative." "I'm aware," he said with a wry smile, but perhaps it's time I valued different things. We discussed practical details, his qualifications, the foundation's needs, the transition that would be required. But beneath the logistics lay something more significant, a bridge being constructed between father and son, spanning years of misunderstanding and distance. "I should tell you," I said as our conversation wound down, "that the foundation has substantial untapped resources. I've been contributing the majority of my investments and military pension for years, with minimal withdrawals for actual operations." Michael looked surprised. "How substantial?" "Enough to expand significantly, to help not just children of fallen soldiers, but perhaps veterans themselves, homelessness, healthcare, education." His eyes widened as he grasped the potential. "You've been planning this all along." "Let's say I've been creating possibilities," I corrected. "Awaiting for the right moment, the right leadership. And you think I could be that leadership?" I studied my son, seeing both the boy he had been and the man he had become. With the right motivation, yes, I do. After Michael left, I rested, the conversation having drained what little energy I had. When I woke, the room was dimly lit, evening having fallen while I slept. Emily sat in the corner chair, reading by the light of a small lamp. "Hey, Dad," she said, noticing I was awake. "Need anything?" "Just company," I replied truthfully. She marked her place and closed her book. "I've been thinking about your story, the full version we're only now learning. And I teach history, but I never really understood how personal it is. How each life contains these hidden chapters that shape everything without being visible." She leaned forward. "My students think history is just facts and dates to memorize. They don't see the human choices behind each event." "Most people don't," I agreed, "until they make choices that become their own history." "I want to document yours," she said suddenly. "The foundation, the covert operations that can be discussed, the whole journey, not just for family archives, but maybe for others to learn from." The suggestion made me uncomfortable. "I never sought recognition, Emily." "It's not about recognition," she insisted. "It's about impact, about showing a different kind of heroism than what's typically celebrated." And her passion reminded me of Sarah in our early years, the same intensity, the same belief in the importance of truth-telling. "If you think it has value beyond our family, I won't object," I conceded. "But no embellishment. The plain truth is enough." "The plain truth is extraordinary," she replied. Days passed, forming a new rhythm of recovery. Physical therapy in the mornings, rest in the afternoons, family dinners in the evenings where conversations gradually became less guarded, more authentic. Tyler appointed himself my special assistant, solemnly delivering medications, reading aloud from history books too advanced for his understanding, but which he insisted on attempting. A week after my return home, Colonel Wilson visited with unexpected news. "The ceremony that was interrupted by your collapse," he said, settling into the chair beside my bed. "It's been rescheduled, once you're stronger." "Frank, I don't need—" "This isn't about what you need," he interrupted firmly. "It's about what others need. Closure, recognition, a chance to say thank you. Not everything is about you, Sullivan." His bluntness made me laugh, triggering a minor coughing fit. "Fair point, Colonel." He studied me with the assessing gaze that had evaluated countless soldiers under his command. "You look better, still too thin, but the color's coming back. Dr. Wilson says I'm ahead of schedule in recovery." "Diane doesn't give false hope," he confirmed. "If she says you're improving, you are." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the ease of men who had shared extreme circumstances and no longer needed words to communicate understanding. "Something else you should know," Frank finally said. "That reporter who broke the story about your foundation, she's been digging deeper, found out about that mission in Kandahar." I stiffened. "Which aspect? The school, the children, the choice you made?" The memory surfaced immediately, a split-second decision during a high-risk extraction. Intelligence had indicated a high-value target was using a local school as cover. Protocol dictated completing the mission as planned. Instead, I'd made the call to evacuate the children first. potentially compromising the operation, but ensuring no civilian casualties if things went wrong. That was classified, I said carefully. Declassified last year, apparently. Part of some transparency initiative. Frank looked troubled. She's framing it as evidence of a pattern. Your consistent prioritization of vulnerable civilians, especially children, from active war zones to your foundation work. Is that a problem? It's creating a narrative, James, a powerful one. Hero soldier secretly saves kids in combat, then continues the mission in civilian life. People are responding to it. I sighed, uncomfortable with the simplification of complex situations into heroic narratives. People want heroes, Frank. They always have. Sometimes they need them, he countered. Especially now. So after he left, I pondered our conversation. The implications of becoming a public figure after decades of deliberate anonymity. There was danger in being elevated, in being transformed from complex human to symbolic hero. Symbols can't fail, can't show weakness, can't evolve. That evening, Sarah brought dinner to my room. Her homemade soup that I remembered from early marriage, before deployments and distance changed everything. You're quiet tonight, she observed, setting the tray across my lap, thinking about the past, about narratives. She sat on the edge of the bed, a casual intimacy that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Which narratives? The ones we create about others, about ourselves. I met her eyes directly. The narrative you created about why I kept volunteering for deployments. She didn't look away. That you chose the military over us, over me, and the narrative I created about why you left, which was that you couldn't handle the absences, that you needed more presence than I could give. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Both contain elements of truth, don't they? But neither is the complete story. No, I agreed. Reality is messier than the stories we tell to make sense of pain. Do you want to know the real reason I left? She asked softly. Do you want to tell me? She looked out the window, gathering thoughts before speaking. I left because I was terrified. Each deployment, the probability of you not coming home increased. I watched wives receive folded flags, attended memorial services, consoled children who couldn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming back. Sarah, I couldn't bear the anticipatory grief, she continued, the constant preparing for loss. So I created the loss myself on my terms when I could control it. She looked back at me. It was cowardice disguised as self-preservation. Her honesty deserved my own. I kept volunteering because I believed I was more valuable there than here, that my skills, my training, could save lives in combat zones, that someone else could be husband and father, but no one else could do what I did over there. Were you right about my skills in combat? Yes. About being replaceable at home? I shook my head. No, that was my failure of imagination. We sat with these truths between us. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness yet, but something equally valuable. Understanding. The weeks of recovery passed, my strength gradually returning. The family settled into a functioning unit, each finding their role. Emily continued teaching, but spent evenings working on her documentation project, recording my memories with careful attention to detail. Michael dove into the foundation work, bringing fresh perspectives and technological innovations that expanded its reach. Tyler divided his time between school and self-appointed grandpa duty, regaling me with playground politics and dinosaur facts. Sarah became the linchpin that held these separate elements together, coordinating schedules, maintaining household operations, ensuring my medical needs were met. We developed a companionable routine, rediscovering aspects of each other we'd forgotten in the years of separation. 2 months after my collapse at the ceremony, Dr. Wilson declared me recovered enough to resume most normal activities, though with continued monitoring of the underlying condition that had complicated my pneumonia. You're not 30 anymore, James, she reminded me during a checkup. You need to respect your body's limitations. I survived 3 wars and a misdiagnosis, I replied. I think I can handle a few limitations. The rescheduled ceremony was set for the following week, enough time for me to have a proper uniform tailored to fit my still thin frame. The event had grown in scope during my recovery, with state officials now planning to attend alongside military leadership and foundation beneficiaries. The night before the ceremony, I found myself unable to sleep. I made my way carefully downstairs, intending to make tea, only to find Sarah already in the kitchen, similarly sleepless. "Nervous about tomorrow?" she asked, sliding a cup toward me. Not nervous, just reflective. About how different everything is from Father's Day, how much has changed in such a short time. She nodded, understanding. From a handshake to all this. Life turns on small moments, I observed. A handshake, a diagnosis, a storm, a choice to forgive, she added quietly. We drank our tea in companionable silence, the house quiet around us. When I finished, I stood to return upstairs but paused at the doorway. "Sarah?" She looked up. "Thank you for being here through all this. You didn't have to be." Her smile held traces of the young woman I'd fallen in love with decades ago. Maybe I wanted to be. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for an outdoor ceremony. I dressed carefully in my uniform, each medal and ribbon a memory, a piece of history earned through blood and sacrifice. When I emerged from my room, the family was waiting, all dressed formally, all wearing expressions of pride that caught me off guard. "You clean up pretty good for an old soldier," Michael commented, his tone light but his eyes serious. "The uniform helps," I replied. "It's not the uniform," Emily contradicted. "It's the man wearing it." Ndeem, at the Veterans Memorial Park, the crowd was even larger than at the original ceremony. Rows of chairs faced the stage, every seat filled, with people standing along the perimeters. Military personnel in dress uniforms, families with children, community members, reporters with cameras. Colonel Wilson met us at the entrance, resplendent in his own dress uniform. "Ready for this, Sullivan?" "As I'll ever be." The ceremony proceeded with military precision. Speeches from officials, testimonials from foundation beneficiaries, a formal recognition of my service record, now fully declassified. Throughout, I maintained the composed expression that had served me through combat and crisis, though inside, I felt a growing sense of completion, of circles closing, of journeys ending and beginning. When it came time for me to speak, I approached the podium slowly, still conscious of my recent illness. Looking out at the assembled crowd, I saw not strangers, but connections, threads in the tapestry of a life I hadn't fully appreciated until I thought it was ending. "I'm not accustomed to public speaking," I began, "or to public recognition. For most of my career, success meant completing the mission without anyone knowing we were there." A ripple of understanding laughter from the veterans in attendance. "What you're recognizing today isn't extraordinary. It's simply duty, to country, to comrades, to the families left behind. If there's any heroism in that, it's the quiet kind practiced daily by thousands of service members and their families. The sacrifices made without fanfare or recognition." I paused, finding my family in the front row, Sarah, Emily, Michael, Tyler, the people for whom my greatest failures of duty had been personal rather than professional. I've learned recently that duty takes many forms, and that sometimes we focus on one at the expense of others equally important. That service to country and service to family aren't competing obligations, but complementary ones. That the same values that make good soldiers, integrity, sacrifice, commitment, make good parents, good spouses, good citizens. My voice grew stronger as I continued, drawing on reserves of conviction rather than physical strength. The foundation being recognized today wasn't created for public acknowledgement. It was created because when we lose comrades in battle, our duty to them doesn't end. It extends to those they left behind. That's not heroism. That's simply honoring the contract we make with each other when we put on the uniform. I gestured toward Michael in the front row. The Foundation's future leadership will build on that principle, expanding its mission to serve more families, more veterans, more children. Not because it's extraordinary, but because it's necessary. As I concluded my remarks, the applause was thunderous, a wave of sound that seemed to physically push against me. Colonel Wilson joined me at the podium, presenting a shadow box containing the medals I'd received throughout my career, including several I hadn't known were being awarded posthumously when my prognosis seemed terminal. Afterward, during the reception, I found myself surrounded by people wanting to share stories, veterans who'd served under my command, families who'd benefited from the foundation, community members who'd followed the unfolding story of my collapse and recovery. Throughout it all, my family remained close, a protective formation around me, ensuring I wasn't overtaxed, that I had moments to rest between conversations. Their presence, their clear pride, their obvious concern, these were worth more than all the official recognition combined. As the event wound down, Tyler tugged at my sleeve. "Grandpa, was that Father's Day handshake worth all this?" The innocent question struck at the heart of everything. Was the pain of that moment, the coldness, the formality, the emptiness I'd felt, worth the journey it had initiated? Worth the revelations, the reconciliations, the second chance at family? I knelt to his level, ignoring the protest in my knees. "Tyler, sometimes the hardest moments lead to the most important changes. That handshake wasn't what I wanted, but maybe it was what I needed, what we all needed, to find our way here." He considered this with the gravity children bring to philosophical questions. So even bad things can turn good with time, with truth, with forgiveness. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember that when you're facing your own hard moments someday." As we drove home, all of us together in one vehicle, a family reunited not by choice initially, but now perhaps by something deeper, I watched the American flag recede in the distance behind us. The same flag that had been the backdrop for my military career, for the Father's Day handshake, for the ceremony today. A symbol of ideals larger than any individual, yet made meaningful only through individual choices and sacrifices, like family, like duty, like forgiveness. The journey ahead remained uncertain. Bob's legal troubles unresolved, my health requiring ongoing monitoring, the new family dynamic still finding its equilibrium. But uncertainty had been my companion throughout life, in combat zones, in marriage, in fatherhood. What felt different now was facing that uncertainty not alone, as I had for so many years, but surrounded by people who knew me completely, my strengths and failures, my service and sacrifices, my public honors and private regrets. A handshake that once symbolized distance now marked the beginning of connection, an ending transformed into a beginning. A revenge I never sought, manifesting not as comeuppance, but as truth finally revealed. As we pulled into the driveway of the home we now shared, I realized that the most meaningful recognition wasn't the medals or the ceremony or the public acclaim. It was this moment, coming home to family who knew me fully and chose to remain anyway. That perhaps was the most unexpected outcome of all. Life has a way of coming full circle when you least expect it. If you had told me 6 months ago that a cold handshake on Father's Day would set in motion events that would transform my family, my legacy, and my very understanding of revenge, I wouldn't have believed you. Yet here I am, James Sullivan, former Special Operations soldier, father, grandfather, and accidental philanthropist, sharing the most extraordinary chapter of my life with you. My story began with that moment of quiet heartbreak, watching my son Michael present his stepfather Bob with an iPhone and luxury vacation while offering me nothing but a formal handshake. The pain of that moment wasn't just about the absence of a gift. It was about what it represented, years of estrangement, of being painted as the absent failure while Bob positioned himself as the successful provider. I never sought revenge for this slight or for the years of manipulation that preceded it. That's not who I am. My military career taught me that revenge is a hollow pursuit, that integrity means doing what's right, regardless of recognition or reward. So I continued living my modest life, maintaining my secret foundation for children of fallen soldiers and accepting whatever scraps of family connection came my way. Then came the diagnosis, terminal illness, or so I believed. The knowledge that my time was limited removed any remaining barriers to truth. When a hurricane destroyed Bob's mansion and exposed his fraudulent business empire, I opened my home to the family that had long kept me at arm's length. In doing so, I inadvertently revealed the life I'd been living parallel to their assumptions. The comfortable house I maintained but rarely used, the significant wealth I'd accumulated but never flaunted, the foundation I'd created without seeking recognition. The revelations continued as they discovered my classified military service, the awards received in private ceremonies, the missions that saved countless lives but could never be discussed. They found evidence of Bob's deliberate interference, intercepted letters, hidden phone messages, calculated manipulations designed to maintain his position as the family patriarch at my expense. My collapse at the ceremony, honoring my foundation work, brought another unexpected turn. The discovery that my terminal diagnosis had been a medical error. I wasn't dying after all. The second chance at life meant confronting questions I thought I'd never have to answer. How would I rebuild relationships without the urgency of impending death? How would we function as a family after years of misconceptions and manipulations? The answers emerged organically as we established new patterns of interaction. Michael taking leadership of my foundation, bringing his corporate skills to a humanitarian cause. Emily documenting my story, preserving truth for future generations. Tyler, my grandson, building the relationship with me that circumstances had previously denied. And Sarah, my ex-wife, the woman whose departure I had never fully understood, finding her way back not to romance, but to genuine respect and care. The rescheduled ceremony became not just recognition of my military service or philanthropic work, but a symbol of transformation, from isolation to connection, from misunderstanding to truth, from judgment to acceptance. Standing before that crowd, seeing my family's pride, I realized that the most meaningful revenge against those who had diminished or dismissed me wasn't proving them wrong. It was living well enough, with enough integrity, that the truth eventually emerged of its own accord. Some might call what happened to Bob, his financial collapse, his legal troubles, his loss of status, a form of cosmic justice, but I see it differently. Bob's downfall wasn't my victory. It was simply the inevitable consequence of choices made, values prioritized, paths taken. While he built an empire of appearances, I built a legacy of substance. While he accumulated wealth for display, I directed resources toward healing and hope. The true revenge, if you can call it that, wasn't Bob's downfall. It was my family's recognition of who I actually was, beneath the stoic exterior and modest presentation. It was Michael's realization that success can be measured in lives changed rather than assets acquired. It was Emily's understanding that quiet heroism often accomplishes more than public accolades. It was Tyler's innocent wisdom that sometimes bad moments lead to good outcomes. Most of all, it was the knowledge that the handshake that once symbolized my exclusion from the family circle now marked the beginning of my return to its center. Not through dramatic confrontation or bitter accusation, but through the simple power of living authentically and allowing truth to reveal itself in its own time. I share this story not to glorify myself. I remain uncomfortable with recognition, with being held up as an example of anything. I share it because perhaps there's something in this journey that resonates with your own experience. Perhaps you too have been misunderstood, underestimated, pushed to the margins of a narrative you should rightfully occupy. Perhaps you too have wondered if truth ever emerges from beneath layers of misperception and manipulation. My experience suggests that it does, though rarely in the time frame or manner we might expect. Sometimes it takes a crisis, a diagnosis, a storm, a collapse, to strip away pretense and reveal reality. Sometimes, the greatest revenge against those who have wronged us is simply to continue being exactly who we are, trusting that authenticity eventually distinguishes itself from performance. If my story has touched you in any way, I ask that you take a moment to connect with this channel that has allowed me to share it. Subscribe to Revenge Expected to hear more stories of justice served in unexpected ways, of truth emerging from darkness, of the quiet revenge that comes not from causing harm, but from living well. Your comments mean more than you might realize. They create community around these shared human experiences, these moments of vulnerability and vindication. What part of my journey resonated most with you? Have you experienced similar moments of unexpected recognition or reconciliation? Have you found, as I did, that sometimes the most powerful response to being wronged is simply to continue being right? The team at Revenge Expected works tirelessly to bring these stories to light, to find the narratives that might otherwise remain hidden behind closed doors or buried in private pain. Your likes and shares help these stories reach others who might need to hear them, who might need to know that sometimes justice arrives in forms we never anticipated. If you've found value in my story or others shared on this channel, please consider supporting Revenge Expected through Gracias. Your donations, however small, help cover the costs of production, research, and the daily work of bringing these powerful narratives to life. The team here isn't driven by profit, but by purpose, by the belief that sharing these experiences creates ripples of understanding and healing that extend far beyond a single viewing. I never sought public recognition for my military service or my foundation work. I share my story now not for acclaim, but in hopes that it might illuminate someone else's path through difficulty toward resolution. The journey from that Father's Day handshake to the family unity we now enjoy wasn't easy or straightforward. It required confronting painful truths, acknowledging failures on all sides, and finding forgiveness for manipulations both deliberate and unconscious. But standing here now, surrounded by the family I once thought lost to me, I can say with certainty that the journey was worth every difficult step. The revenge I never sought came in the form I most needed, not destruction of those who wronged me, but restoration of what truly mattered. Thank you for witnessing my story, for holding space for both the pain and the healing it contains, for being part of this unexpected final chapter that transformed a handshake of distance into an embrace of belonging. This is James Sullivan, signing off from Revenge Expected. Remember that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't what we do to others, but what we allow life to reveal in its own perfect timing.